Today I'm continuing my series on the reliability of the Gospels and reports of miracles. The first miracle I'm going to discuss is the most important miracle for Christianity, and that is the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. In my opinion, the very best type of argument to make for this, and the type of argument that we actually need to be making, is what I'm going to call a Paley-style argument. This is named for William Paley. He was the Anglican clergyman from the 1700s in that golden age of Christian apologetics in response to the deists and various skeptics. This type of argument was very popular, this type of approach, and it has never been rendered obsolete, though it has fallen out of fashion. But those are not the same thing. So I want to present this and show how it goes. I'm going to give both a very brief version of it and then a sort of medium length version of it. I'm going to link again in the description of the video down below a webinar that I did contrasting this type of approach with a more popular approach known as the minimal facts approach. I'm not going to discuss here why I think the Paley style is better, but I discuss that in detail there. It's very important that we make a strong argument for the resurrection as Christians if we want to ask people to become Christians, because what we're asking them to do is accept a miracle and then on the basis of that miracle to commit their lives to Jesus to such an extent that they would even be willing to die. And we need a very strong argument in order to make that pitch, to make that request, to make that demand upon people. So here, very briefly, first is how the Paley-style argument goes in my favorite way of putting it. We have reports of people who claimed to be witnesses, to have seen and interacted with Jesus after his resurrection. For those witnesses, there are three possibilities. Either they were deceived, which would include their being honestly mistaken in various ways, or they were deceivers, that is, they were liars, or they were telling the truth. That is to say, what they said was actually true, that Jesus was physically risen from the dead. The content of their testimony makes it enormously improbable that they were deceived, that is, that they were mistaken. The circumstances of their testimony makes it enormously improbable that they were deceivers, that they were liars. Therefore, the most probable explanation, overwhelmingly the most probable explanation, is that what they testified to was true, that it really happened, that Jesus really physically rose from the dead. Now that's the really brief version. Let's expand on that a little bit. Let's do a medium length version. Let's talk first of all about that option that they were deceived, that they were mistaken in some honest way. This is where the reliability of the Gospels really comes into play. Skeptical scholar Bart Ehrman has said that if there were any group appearance experiences of the risen Jesus, he would say that at most those group appearance experiences would have been vision at a distance, apparently seeing Jesus at a distance. Now, that is really Bart Ehrman making something up that we don't have. We don't have any attestation to some mere seeing at a distance. So what Ehrman wants to say is that they've been embellished from there, that that's where it started out, and that then the accounts we have been embellished from that point onward. But when we argue that the Gospels are highly reliable, and we have to be prepared to argue that, then we are arguing that the authors did not include these things that were at many removes and that had been embellished in the meanwhile, or that the authors themselves embellished, but rather that these are accounts that come from close to the facts and that these actually represent what the witnesses attested, which is something that Bart Ehrman expressly denies. So you're prepared to defend that. That doesn't mean in your initial statement of the case you bring out all of the evidence for that. In any debate context, no matter what method you're using, you're going to have opening statements, and then you're going to have a longer debate where the other person brings up his challenge and you go back and forth. And that's true of those who do debates based on the minimal facts account as well. So what were these testimonies according to the gospel accounts? Well, they were very detailed. They were not just vision at a distance. They involved conversations. They involved many different groups of people. Not the same group. It wasn't like the same group every time. It wasn't the same person every time. It involved multi-sensory experiences where they were hearing Jesus and they were seeing Jesus and Jesus was inviting them to touch him. It involved conversation back and forth. It wasn't just, oh, I had this vision and he gave a inspiring message. It was approximately 2 sentences long and then he disappeared. No, there's supposed to have been detailed conversations during which he's talking to them, they're talking to him, they're talking to each other, they're interacting back and forth in various ways. In fact, it even mentions that he ate with them. There are 2 different accounts that mention him eating with them. These involved people who are named. They involved women and men. They involved sometimes just one person, like Mary Magdalene, apparently saying she met Jesus alone, but sometimes larger groups of people over a period of about 40 days after he allegedly rose from the dead. And they involved skeptics. Now, this is enormously difficult to explain on any naturalistic hypothesis. You'll sometimes hear people talk about suicide bombers or other people who are willing to die for what they believe. But we're not talking about their being willing to die for an idea. We're not talking about their being willing to die for something they felt in their heart. We're talking about these witnesses attesting to a very concrete, specific, empirical type of experience. If they really had these kinds of experiences, all these different people interacting with Jesus, appearing to interact with Jesus and with each other in all these different ways in these lengthy conversations and so forth, then we don't have any precedent of those kinds of interactions and that variety and so forth, where we then learn that it's not true, that it's non-veridical. That would be very hard to explain. And in fact, someone like Thomas, as recounted in the Gospels, was not even expecting this to happen. In fact, he denied it. And then a week later, had this experience with the rest of the group where Jesus was talking to them and inviting him to touch his wounds, and Thomas then admitted that Jesus was risen from the dead. So this isn't even a case of working people up to a height of expectation or hysteria. Now, that presses us in the direction of fraud, because if these are just too detailed to be the kind of thing that can be explained in a naturalistic fashion, if it really happened to these people, then what the skeptic can say is, well, maybe they just made it up. Maybe it's just a lie. We do have lies. People do tell lies, absolutely. And we even have conspiracies to tell lies. That's also true. But this conspiracy would be very different than the ones we know of and acknowledge. I'm also going to link down in the video description a post that I put up recently based on some correspondence I had concerning the possibility of a conspiracy among the supposed witnesses of the resurrection of Jesus, and why that's a really bad explanation. One reason is the kind of independence that you have here. It's not as though there was one person in charge just forcing everybody else to attest to this, forcing everybody else to tell the same tale. In fact, you would have had countervailing influences upon the people. Take, for example, Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's household manager. What did Chuza stand to gain by letting his wife get involved in a conspiracy to say that she had seen angels at the tomb of this man who had been crucified and who the religious leaders hated and so forth? And then if she was one of the women involved in the account in Matthew, that she had even seen him, Jesus himself. Why would Chuza have gone along with that at all? he would have had every reason to tell her, don't get involved in that. In fact, that's true even if what she said was true, but all the more so if she was just getting involved in a conspiracy. Or consider James, the brother of Jesus. He was well respected in the Jewish community. We have independent evidence to that effect, and had previously been skeptical of his brother's claims. He could have just gone on being skeptical. If Jesus didn't rise from the dead, why would he go out there and get involved in any kind of conspiracy to elevate his brother to exalted status when there was so much pressure against it? Now that brings us to a different point. The reliability of Acts upholds the tremendous conditions of persecution under which they were attesting, the surrounding circumstances that gave them every motive not to attest to this. Now let's contrast that again with other conspiracies that we know of. Let's say we're talking about a criminal conspiracy in the mob. They, let's say, commit a murder because a person hasn't paid protection money, and then the police begin investigating, and the people involved in the murder have every reason to lie. Why? To get themselves out of trouble, because they murdered somebody. So the lie and the conspiracy to lie is intended to get you out of trouble. In this case, if it were a lie, the conspiracy to lie would be what got them into trouble. That is to say, all they had to do was stay quiet. The embarrassment of having backed a failed messianic claimant, that's embarrassing. But they could just go back to their lives as Jews. They had a relationship with God through the sacrificial system, through the law. They had, in some cases, families, either parents or wives. They had ways of making a living. They could have just remained silent and gone back to the lives that they had had before. Jesus' ministry was only 3 years. And nobody would have been trying to kill them. But Acts shows us that they were threatened. James, the son of Zebedee, actually was killed. John and Peter were beaten, and they were constantly in danger. And they began testifying only 6 weeks after the religious leaders had successfully gotten Jesus crucified by order of the Roman governor. So they were in enormous danger, and for them to speak up and start this thing going was itself what got them into trouble. That makes it very different from any ordinary criminal conspiracies, and moreover, ordinary criminal conspiracies are pretty hard to hold together too. They don't always hold together, especially not for this number of different people in different groups. Again, not all under some kind of centralized mind control or something like that. That consideration of independence also is relevant to ideas about hallucinations or elaborating initial vague experiences and so forth. If you haven't had a strongly veridical experience and you've got skeptical people, friends and family members saying, what really happened and so forth, it's not as though there was someone just saying, you saw Jesus risen, didn't you? Yes, I saw Jesus risen. Okay, these were different people coming together and making these claims in ways that they didn't all have to make separately. Now that's a sort of overview of how this goes. Obviously, there would be a lot more that could be said. Ultimately, this is an explanatory argument. But I wanted to show you how this kind of argument goes in general, both in a very brief outline and in a longer outline, to show that it's not necessary to give all kinds of other data and take forever and answer every possible objection in order to state a positive case and to show the way that that positive case has force. That's what we want to be able to do. We want to be able to show what the force of the evidence is in an initial statement. The strong explanatory argument is that Jesus of Nazareth rose from the dead. That presents a challenge to the skeptic to commit his life to Jesus. And I would like to suggest that that challenge is out there for anyone skeptical who happens to be watching this or agnostic who happens to be watching this. Naturally, in a longer debate, I would be giving evidence for the reliability of the Gospels and against the hypothesis that these were embellished. And I've done that in other contexts as well. In a half an hour initial statement in a debate context, I think one should give some samples of that as well, which I haven't taken the time to do here. This case, if it succeeds, is extremely powerful. It presents a case that can overcome even a low prior probability for the resurrection or for a miracle. And that's what we need to be prepared to give. Now, next time I'm going to be discussing some other miracle reports in the Gospels that are briefer, that don't have as much detail to them as we have with the reports of Jesus' appearances after his resurrection. And I'm going to be discussing what kind of evidence those reports actually do provide for the miracles, the specific miracles that they record. And I'm going to be discussing how that intersects with our independent evidence, like what I gave here today, that Jesus was in fact God from the resurrection, which of course would mean that he himself was capable of performing these miracles. The ones that I intend to discuss, I have to work it out and see if I'm going to put those together, but I think I will be the raising of Jairus' daughter and the miracle of the woman with an issue of blood, because these are told together in the Gospels. They happen at the same time, and Jesus is even interrupted in going to Jairus' daughter by the woman with the issue of blood. So my plan right now is to discuss those two together. I hope that you will continue following this series and that you'll come back next time. Thanks for watching.